I use it on the lesson tee every day. Essentially, I use it on tour.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Stephanie Way. I am a co-founder and VP of Marketing and Communications at Sportsbox, and I'm joined by some other Sportsbox members. We have Ryan Crawley, our Director of Sales, Paul Park, our Director of Partnerships, Jihei Lee, our CEO, Andy Hydorn, Sales and Operations and Partnerships. I think, Andy, right? Yeah. And then we have Dr. Phil Cheetham, our Chief Science Officer and biomechanist. And then our speaker tonight is Jeff Smith, AKA Radar Golf Pro. And obviously those two need no introduction. We're very excited to hear about the sway trackers, Phil, and swing geometry from Jeff. Just want to use this time, a few minutes, to talk about some announcements and upcoming events. We're going to have another webinar in 2 weeks with Jorge Parada. He teaches many LPGA players like Mel Reed, Carlotta Saganda. And then we're also going to have 2 weeks after that, Justin Parsons. So please look out for those announcements, and we'll see you there. Also, we have some exciting app feature announcements at the end of the month. You guys asked for 2D drawing tools, and we are putting those in the app. Look out for an announcement end of the month. We'll have 2D drawing tools, speed trackers, a new UI. And then it's become much easier to add students and create student accounts now. Actually, Jihei is going to demo for you. You can just create student accounts from the app now. It's very easy. And then you can create sessions for them from there right away. I'll let Jihei demo that process.
Yeah, just a quick demo to show you guys. If you guys haven't gotten the updates on the app yet, please, go to the App Store and make sure you get the update that's available now. Every 4 to 6 weeks, there are new features and things like that we introduce. So I definitely would recommend going into your App Store and updating as frequently as possible. So as Steph mentioned, we've made it far easier to add a student. Prior to this update, you had to have, student's name, email address, send an invite, and the student had to accept it for you to start coaching them. Now you can either from your homepage directly search for a student by name or email address. So I'll go and search for a demo student. There's a whole bunch of accounts with demo in it. And if you don't see the student that you want to teach among this list, you can create a new student. And by populating their first and last name, email address, date of birth, gender, dexterity, left or right hand, height, and hip width, you can just create an account. And once you tap create an account, they'll immediately appear in your student list so that you can start creating a session for them right away. You don't have to wait for them to accept your invite for them to appear as a student on your account. So I'm just going to go into this student and show you, obviously one of the big benefits of having a student created here is that all of their, height and dexterity information and the hip width that is tailored to them, and all the measurements that you get will be based on those metrics that you put in there. Also makes it really easy to keep them organized. So all of the lessons that you teach for them, it's organized on one page instead of having to go through all of your sessions to look for a past session. And one more big, major benefit is now we have this thing called a watch list. And I'll show you what that looks like. So this is a watch list that kind of defines one or multiple things that you're working on with that student. And you can either choose from one of these preset watch lists that are popular or commonly found flaws in the swing that's defined by one of our trackers or multiple trackers, or you can create your own. So if this particular student is working on getting a little more turn, and you can just create that watch list for them by selecting the tracker that you want to add and adding a swing position. It pre-populates, like auto-populates the range for you based on, whether it's a male or a female student. If it's a male student, it'll pull from the PGA Tour range. If it's a female student, it'll pull from the female LPGA Tour range. You can obviously tailor that if you want it to be a tighter range or a more generous range. You can kind of customize it for the student. And once you set this, every swing you analyze for that student will show this. So if they're in the range that you set for them, it'll show up in green. If they're not in the range, then it'll show up in yellow or red. And this in turn shows up on the student's account. So if they are creating their own sessions, recording themselves during practice in between lessons, they can see immediately whether they're on the right track, in the range that you set for them or not. So really great tool to teach with. So just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of this new feature. If you guys have any questions about either of these new feature updates, adding students, please just reach out to one of us.
Yeah, thanks, Jihei. Okay, so we'll get started with the main feature, the main program. I'll let Dr. Phil Cheetham take it away.
All right, thanks, Stephanie. Let me set up my screen just quickly, open the slideshow, and share my screen. Share. All right, you guys should be able to see that pretty easily. Thumbs up, yeah?
Yep.
Good, good. All right, well, we're going to talk about, Jeff is going to talk about swing geometry, and we're going to focus on impact posture when we're talking about swing geometry. So I'm going to give you some background again, as I always do, on basically some theory, refresh you on some things you've probably seen before, and then talk about how relevant it is to Jeff's topic. So let's go. First one, you've probably seen this several times before, but I'm going to do a quick definition of a couple of terms. So biomechanics, the study of human motion using principles of math, geometry, physics, engineering, and anatomy. So we use sports biomechanics to provide a rationale for why we teach technique. We want to teach and optimize technique, and we can use biomechanics to help us optimize that technique using, like I said, the laws of physics. So our two goals are improve performance and hopefully reduce injury. So we're looking at those two things. The idea of performance is really a tightrope. You're walking a tightrope, you're trying to perform as best you can. On one side, though, you've got performance, and on the other side, you've got injury. So you've got to be right on top. And biomechanics can help us walk that narrow line. It can also, of course, help us design equipment, as you can see with all the different styles of golf clubs and etc. So anyway, moving on. This is important here. The difference between kinematics and kinetics. Kinematics is the motion of objects or bodies without concern for the forces or torques that are producing them. So trackers, as we call them, they're actually kinematic parameters. They're kinematic time series data. Time series data means that we've got a value for every video image that we capture, and we capture at about 120 frames per second. So you've got an image and data at each one of those frames. And so we can create a curve, which I'll show you in a minute. And that's what kinematics is. Now, you've heard of kinetics as well. That's forces. The forces and interactions of those forces that produce or affect motion. It includes internal forces from your muscles and on your joints and your bones. And of course, it includes external forces as well. I like to think of it as kinematics is the look of the motion and kinetics is the feel of the motion. All right, so let's focus on a couple of our trackers that we just mentioned the term trackers. So let's focus on a couple that are important to what Jeff's going to talk about today. First one being chest turn. And like I said, you've got a curve up here. Wait a minute, let me choose the marker or the laser pointer. Okay, cool. So I'm going to focus mainly on impact. We've got data for all of the different parts of the key positions in the swing, but I'm going to focus on impact position. So you can see that we slightly open at address, we turn in the backswing, then we turn rapidly into the downswing, and then we stabilize at finish. We transition before the top of backswing. So again, let's look at impact. For men, we find that we are 29 degrees on average, and the women are 32 degrees on average, with about a standard deviation of 10 or 9 maybe. But the standard deviation gives us an indication of how spread out the tour pros are in our database. So we've got 103 men and we've got 24 women. We're trying to build up the women's database much more rapidly and get the same amount of women. But anyway, it's still a good number to give us an idea of what the averages and what the ranges are. So we use these standard deviations to set the ranges that Jihei was talking about earlier. So the outside range for men would be 39 or 19 to 39. And that would mean that if you fall in the range, you're within like 70% of what everybody else is doing or what the rest of the tour pros. If you fall outside the range, then you're actually different to about 84%, which is, I like to round it off to like 9 out of 10 of the golf pros. If you're out of range, you're different to what they're doing. And that means you need to have a look at why. So anyway, back to impact. So we see that impact is open. It's impact for chest turn is open less than the pelvis. And I'll talk about that in a minute when I talk about the pelvis. But these numbers, they obviously can vary depending on the swing type and the things like club closure rate. I've got a slide at the end where we can look at club closure rate. So these are a guideline for what you're expecting. But notice you're not square, you're not back to the address position at impact. Your chest is open. Okay, pelvis. Pelvis is also open at impact. In fact, it's more open at impact than the chest is. What did we say, about 30 degrees? So we're looking here at 41 for the men and 52. So it's more than 10 degrees open more than the chest. So it's interesting. It's a similar number to the top of backswing. So you turn your pelvis about 45 to 48 degrees in the backswing, and in impact, you're about 41 to 52 degrees. So it's obviously in a different direction. One's closed and one's open, but it's interesting to see that you've got that range of motion from your backswing to impact. By the way, I like to talk with my hands, and that's why I'm wearing my sling right now, because I had a rotator cuff surgery. And so I was told I have to keep the sling on so that I don't start talking with my arms and hurt my shoulder again. Anyway, that's by the way. So I said it's open more than the pelvis at impact. And just like chest turn, it's going to vary depending on your swing type, what you're aiming to do in the swing, whether you're trying to do a fade or a slide, whether you're not trying to do a slice, but whether you're trying to do a fade or a draw, and what sort of closure rate you have of the club face. I'm going to move through these relatively quickly because I want to hear what Jeff's got to say. I've got a couple more to talk about. So chest side bend. Around impact and in early follow through, we see an interesting fact here. We see that around impact, we're about 30 degrees of side bend, but it maxes out after impact. So you'll see this curve here. It's on its way up. So you're right side bending quickly if you're right hand. Sorry?
Let's buy a new table.
I'm sorry. Didn't hear you. Okay, I'll keep going. Yeah, so anyway, we see that at impact, you're about 30 degrees, but you keep right side bending. And so one of the things we've got to be looking out for is that right side bend doesn't get too excessive. So like in this one, this is quite a large side bend. Anything over about 60 degrees, I would consider an excessive right side bend, and that can set you up for back problems. So that's an injury outline right there. They call it, it's kind of like related to the crunch factor. Again, your right side bend will vary depending on your closure rate and your swing type. So pelvis side bend. Pelvis side bend has almost the same shape as chest side bend, which you would expect. I mean, they're both bending similarly, but the pelvis is of a much lower degree. So you can see at impact, it's only about 9 or 10 degrees to the trail side. And of course, side bend is how much you're tipping your chest or your pelvis side to side. So, and just like the chest, it reaches maximum after impact. So, but it's not very large. And so we don't want to see it get more than about 20 degrees. Otherwise, we're in the territory of large crunch factor on the spine. Okay, moving through these relatively quickly. Now, those are the turn and the angular measurements. Now we'll quickly look at pelvis sway and chest sway. Again, specifically at impact. So pelvis, we're looking at pelvis first this time. So pelvis begins to move towards the target before the top of backswing, and it reaches about 3 to 4 inches past where you were at address. This positive number means that 0 is at the address position, and so positive means you've moved past the address position. So excessive sway at impact is called sliding, and a low number is called hanging back. So it's interesting to compare the men and the women. The men have about 4 inches, a bit more than 4 inches of pelvis sway towards the target at impact, and the women only have about 3 inches. So they're kind of hanging back a little bit more than the men. It's interesting that women tend to have more turn, they have larger turn numbers, and they seem to have lower sway numbers. So the turn numbers, you can understand that's because of flexibility, but it's interesting to see that they have slightly less side-to-side motion than the men do. And let's look at chest. So the chest curve is a little different than the pelvis curve. And it's interesting because your chest does begin to sway before the top of backswing, just like the pelvis. 100% of them are already moving towards the target before the top of backswing. But notice how it goes up, gets positive, which means the chest goes past where you were at address, but then it backs up very rapidly. So it moves back away from the target after about club parallel to the ground. And the reason for that is the release. So as soon as you release the club, that creates a force that moves against your hand, against your arm, and literally pushes your entire body back. It's a counterbalance. Think about it when the club, or especially the driver, is moving at 100+ miles per hour. It weighs for that instant more than 100 pounds. And so you've got to basically, you could think of like a hammer throw. You've got to lean back and you've got to lean away so that you don't fall over onto your nose. So you see this movement away from the target. Notice then at impact, the men and women are slightly away from the position that they were at address. Men by only about 1/10 of an inch, women by about 1 inch. So they're a little bit, they move back a little bit more. So this swaying, if it's done effectively, it really, in time with your release, it really can help you increase the speed of your club and certainly maintain balance. Too much or too little can give you inconsistent ball contact. So that's a few of the trackers. Just like to do one slide to show an effect that I found on turn and side bend in my PhD dissertation. So this is a slide taken from my biomechanics PhD dissertation, looking at handle twist velocity, which is basically analogous to club face closure rate. Handle twist velocity is how fast the handle is turning, how fast you're turning the handle, and closure rate is how fast that's making the club face close. So you can see here that the relationship, those with a high handle twist velocity and high club face closure rate had less side bend and less turn at impact than those with low handle twist velocity had more side bend and more turn at impact. And the other interesting thing is if you look at the avatar here, you can see that the elbow is more bent, is more flexed in the low handle twist velocity. The knee is more flexed and the trail wrist is more extended. So those are all kind of features that go together with a low handle twist or low closure rate. And if you're trying to teach either one of these two methods, then you have to get the swing balanced with all of these. You can't mix and match certain parameters. So this is generally what's going to happen with a low closure rate, and this is what's going to happen with a higher closure rate. So that's a little overview of what, and an introduction to what Jeff's going to talk about. So a couple of my take-home messages. At impact, body posture must match the swing style and type of shot. And it's different for a high closure rate of the club, low closure rate of the club, draw, fade. All of these types of shots that you're making with the club are going to need different body posture at impact. And the cool thing about Sportsbox is that you can verify that the golfers of yours are in fact hitting those correct postures by looking at the numbers from the Sportsbox app. So that's it from me. We're going to move on now, and Jeff Smith is going to talk about swing geometry and hopefully touch on some of the things that I teed up for him. So I'll close down my screen and hand it over to Jeff.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for that, Dr. Phil. First of all, let me start off by saying I appreciate you guys having me on here. Flattering that you guys would reach out to hear my thoughts on the golf swing, and I'll do the best I can to sort of answer your questions at the end, and hopefully shed some light on the app and how I use it on a day-to-day basis. But you know, the term swing geometry is where I'll start. That's been around as far as I can remember, that term in golf instruction. I think it's probably more popular, or more people know what that term means today because of, you know, the ability to measure in 3D with different tracking devices, you know, Doppler radar technology. All these different technologies have sort of come along and shed some light on that. I'll start with just a simple definition of what the best way I would describe swing geometry, and that's just, we heard Dr. Phil talk a lot about kinematics, and so I describe it as the kinematic movements of the body throughout the swing that influence the club's movement through impact. And so, you know, when you think of geometry, you think of the club moving in a big circle. Most people have a great understanding nowadays of how the club is moving, how that circle is oriented throughout impact. We like to use the term club path. People describe, you know, they now well understand ball flight generally, and they'll understand that the club path is moving to the right for someone who's hitting a draw, moving to the left for someone who's hitting a fade, or moving pretty straight for someone who's hitting a straighter ball flight. And so I'm going to focus a little bit on, you know, essentially three segments of the body, if you will, two segments of the body, the torso, and I'm going to focus on how it rotates and how it tilts. We refer to that as side bend. Also the pelvis, rotations and side bends. And then, as Dr. Phil mentioned earlier, the sway values or sway angles of both the pelvis and the torso. And so I'm going to use three different examples here. I'm going to start out by using an example that'll probably, you know, we'll see every single day on our lesson tee. I know there's probably a lot of coaches on here. We're all going to teach, you know, a medium to high handicap golfer from time to time, and they're typically going to struggle with a slice. So I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about that. If I can just share my screen real quick. All right, so we've all kind of seen this, this golfer on our range from time to time, and I'm going to focus on a few relationships. Phil did a great job of kind of breaking down these things individually, and one of the things that you'll notice, he was talking a lot about averages at certain positions in the golf swing, and I think the key to putting this together as a coach is not so much looking at the averages, but looking at different relationships of these body segments, what they're doing from a rotation, from a tilting standpoint. And when you can understand those things a little bit better, ball flight and certain matchups throughout the swing start to become a lot more clear to you. And so that's, it's incredible that technology like this has come about. I use it on the lesson tee every day. Essentially, I use it on tour most weeks, because these are specific things that I'm working on with my players, and it's great to be able to validate, the work that they're putting in, because sometimes it can feel like you're grinding away on something, you're not really getting anywhere. Tools like this really help you validate that. So when we look at a slicer, we're going to look, obviously, we know that the club path is moving to the left through impact. Generally, there'll be a club face alignment that's open to that path. It's producing that left to right curve. And Phil showed us some relationships of the pelvis and the torso at impact. And there's a general theme there. When you look at someone that's hitting a slice, if you just start with rotation and you look at the relationship between I'm going to go one more frame forward here. If you look at the relationship of the chest to start with, how much the chest is rotated and how much side bend there is. When you look at the pelvis, you see how much rotation there is and how much side bend there is. So those things are dramatically affected by these sway values that you see here on the right. When good players transition, and I'll take this high handicap slicer to the top here, as I move him forward in the transition, I want you to notice how early on his chest is swaying toward the target at a much greater rate than his pelvis. And that's kind of the exact opposite of what you see high-level ball strikers doing, okay? So the sway of these two body segments is largely affecting how much side bend the chest can be in, how much rotation the chest can have. And so you'll see that the players will start to be a lot more square with both their hips and their chest at impact when they're in this slice pattern. And it's largely because these sway values are so high. And these are things, when you look at this player swing on video, this doesn't really stand out a whole lot to you when you're just looking at a 2D video. But when you can quantify it and show, these markers where, this player, the blue line you see coming out of the center of the chest is well ahead of the pelvis, and that's going to have an effect on those side bend rates. And so if I'm able to flip this around, you guys have all seen sort of this image right here a little bit. When that upper body is swaying toward the target and there's a lack of right side bend, it has a huge effect on the hand path of this golfer. the cool thing here is we can put a marker and a trace on the hand path to illustrate that to our student. And so you'll notice here in late backswing, you can see the trace, and then in transition, you'll see this hand path moving out pretty sharply. Okay, that's the over the top, move that we all see, on the lesson tee. And, oftentimes when you see that, it's hard for you to get to root cause. And I think that's the key to any lesson. And that's what I'm always after is, okay, when I film this down the line, I can see, okay, his hand path is shifting out, he's coming over the top. But being able to, sort of quantify and get to root cause is going to help us solve this problem for this player, much, much easier. If we look at someone that's hitting a draw, we're going to see kind of the exact opposite of what's going on here. And I'll pull one of those up for you real quick. We'll kind of look at those same values for a player like Rory McIlroy, who is, prolific in moving the ball sort of right to left. All right, so all those same markers going on, we're going to see a quite different late backswing transition move here. I'm going to take him in the late backswing. All right, so you'll notice how the pelvis will start to sway, and it will essentially outrace what the chest is doing. And we get quite a big differential happening between how quickly the pelvis is moving toward the target or the distance that it's traveling. And this is showing you that in inches. So 6.3 inches toward the target, where the chest is kind of staying back. So that pelvis sway is having an effect on his torso. It's helping to create right side bend or right tilt, which we can measure here, 31 degrees at this point. But it's also having an effect on his hand path. And so when we flip that around and look at it again from down the line, we're going to see kind of the opposite. I'll back it up, that we saw from our slicer. So you'll see the hand path actually get a little bit deeper on the way down. That is because of the relationship of the side bend that's going in with the pelvis swaying toward the target while the chest stays back. And, Phil did a great job of showing you, some averages of, say, impact here. I'm going to flip this around so I can get him exactly at impact. So probably right there. Now, as it relates to swing geometry, there's something I want to call out to you here. We saw that, Rory had more pelvic sway toward the target in early transition. We saw that had an effect on the amount of right side bend that was going in. We also saw that had effect on his hand path, and it essentially made his hand path in the club much shallower and approaching the golf ball much more from the inside. There's also a relationship here when you look at the chest, and this is something that I'll look at with every single player, all of my tour players, when they tell me I want to have a specific ball flight. Someone that's hitting a draw, we are almost always going to see a greater side bend value at impact than we are a rotation value. So you can see Rory is there at about 23 degrees of right side bend with the chest and only 18 degrees turned. Now his pelvis is, pretty open at 30 degrees, but it also has a pretty high right side bend value there. All of those things, these kinematics that you're seeing, are having an effect on his swing geometry. It's producing a more into out, a more shallow angle of approach, with the club. So when you think about it, the only connection that we have to the club is through our hands, and our hands are applying forces, and there's torques occurring, And those things are largely happening because of the way that our body is rotating, the way that our body is tilting, and the way that those body segments, specifically the pelvis and the torso, are swaying. Now, there's a lot of other things like how we're interacting with the ground, but from a baseline standpoint, every single day on the range, just a conceptual understanding of this stuff is going to help you problem solve, and maybe take you down a road where you're making less changes to a student. I know that that's what Sportsbox provides for me, because there's oftentimes things where I'll see something on video that I might not aesthetically like the way that it looks, and then I'll take a little deeper look in 3D here, and I'm like, okay, those values make sense based on the ball flight that player is trying to achieve. When I'm on tour, I see the best ball strikers not curve the ball very much. They generally hit the ball pretty straight. And, I coach Viktor Hovland, who's a very straight hitter of the ball. I would say that he hits generally a fade. And I want to show you some of those same relationships that I just talked about with Rory, and how they would be a little bit different for someone who's hitting a fade or hitting a straighter ball flight. And I'm going to focus on just those things that Phil talked about at sort of at impact. So probably in this ballpark right here. Now you'll notice those same markers that we looked at for the chest with Rory. He had a little bit more side bend than he had rotation. And here's a golfer who is hitting it really, really straight, or having the ball fall to the right. You're seeing that he has more rotation than he does side bend. So those are, again, that's a great example of what I call swing geometry, how these turning, the angles that he's turning on, the angles that he's side bending on, how that's influencing the club delivery at impact. And, from a down the line, perspective, you would expect to see, the player look really, really open. This looks very similar to the avatar that, Dr. Phil referenced when he was talking about an example of a low handle twist velocity player, someone that in the golf instruction world, we like to call like stable club base. I've actually had Viktor's rate of closure measured on Enzo, and it's one of the lowest recorded rate of closures in the golf industry. And he's pretty prolific for, when you look at a video of his swing from about waist high to waist high on the other side, when he hits it in the middle of the face, you just don't see the club face move very much. And there's a lot of things that he's doing in his swing that are unique, to his golf swing. But there are a lot of things that he's doing that I see players doing every day. Like Dr. Phil referenced the side bend values, the rotation values, how the trail arm stays flexed, how the trail wrist stays extended, right knee being flexed a little bit more. All these things have an effect on, Viktor's swing geometry. His club path is pretty neutral or a little bit to the left. And that's through the bag, whether he's hitting an iron or a driver. And these values give you some insight on, how he's able to produce that. And it's really cool to be able to measure this, day to day on the range. And I'll be quite honest with you. There's times where some of my players I won't see them for a few weeks, or they go play a tournament in a lot of wind or something like that. And I'll get back with them at a tournament, and boom, I'll take a quick, capture and kind of go right to this stuff as a frame of reference, because it's important to know when they're playing really well what they're doing and when they're playing poorly what they're doing. And I do see some fluctuations in these three areas: the rotation angles, the tilting angles, and the the sway angles. So for example, these guys go play a tournament in the wind. The first thing they do is they start to hang on their left side, and they don't sway naturally off the ball the way that they normally would when they're hitting a high golf shot. Well, that sway, that hanging left to try to flight the ball or hit it low, completely kind of changes their swing geometry a little bit. Their turning rates go down, their side bend rates go up, the handle creeps a little bit more forward at impact. So then when they're trying to problem solve why they're hitting certain shots, they're not aware. But again, a tool like this provides me clarity every day, on my lesson tee, and it makes it much easier for me to explain to the student. Those are the 3 examples that I wanted to share with you guys, and I think we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, if you guys want to drop any questions in the chat.
There's a couple of them in there.
Oh, okay, let me look. Okay. Let's see. From Andy, what kind of things do you do for a player when their pelvis when their pelvis outraces the torso and chest too much and shoulders tilt back at P6? All
right, so let me flip this around, because I'll just kind of use this avatar to answer some of these questions. That's a great question. I see that a lot, especially with good players. I like this visualization here. I'm gonna make the avatar a little bit bigger. I will use this visualization a lot. And what I'm showing here, demonstrating, is left tilt to the pelvis here. I'll scoot it over. You can see about 7 degrees of side bend there, left tilt. And what I'll do is I will put an alignment stick through the player's belt loops, and I will have them sort of look face on in a mirror. And so they will understand that when they straighten their trail leg and they turn and rotate, the trail side of their pelvis is going to get higher than the lead side, and they're going to establish an angle. And I will have them sort of rehearse coming out of transition and sort of maintaining this left tilt. And I'm saying left tilt because this is a right-handed golfer, but you can see how Viktor here in transition really maintains sort of that left tilt to his pelvis. And a golfer that is going to slide their hips really forward, the right side of that alignment rod is going to drop really quickly. So when they're standing there face on in the mirror and they're really just trying to maintain some of that left pelvic tilt, what that does is it makes them become a little bit more, it increases their rotation values. And they'll start to turn more. And when they're turning more, they'll have less time to side bend or slide. When you think about the pelvis and its 6 degrees of freedom that it can move in, those relationships, you're generally trading one thing for another. So if I'm going to slide my hips, I'm going to diminish rotation. If I'm going to rotate more, I'm going to diminish the sway. And so that understanding those relationships will help you kind of problem solve that specific question that you posed there.
Okay, are there any more questions? There have to be.
I've got one. Jeff, you were talking about how, whether it's weather or the environment can sometimes affect a player's swing. Can you give us a couple more examples like that where, if you've explicitly seen a player swing differently on certain shape holes or, like other environmental effects that you've been able to measure?
Yeah, so I'll give you a perfect example. So last week I'm at the Tour Championship with a couple players. I'm gonna get killed for saying this, but man, the driving range is on about a 10-degree upslope, if you can believe that, at the Tour Championship. And so I noticed that my guys hitting balls all week long, because they're hitting on an upslope, they all started to swing more into out. they started coming in more shallow, more into out, so that they could swing up the slope. So guys like Aaron Wise, who play a fade, the next thing I know, the ball's starting to the right and drawing, and he's really confused as to how he's getting into this pattern. But all I had to do was take a quick video, you know, and then import it into Sportsbox, and I'm seeing, okay, he's sliding his pelvis more, the right side bend values of torso are starting to go up. I quickly compare that to where he's normally at, you know, when he's hitting it well, and I can see, wow, he's rotating a lot less. He has a bit more sway, and it's all so that he can get clean contact on a slightly uphill range. And so, you know, the reason why, there's a lot of reasons why we struggle with balls below our feet in the fairway, balls above our feet in the fairway, down slopes, all these different things. And it's just simply because we usually don't get enough repetition to understand that these kinematics have to change just a little bit to handle those lies and take on the challenge of hitting those shots. But I've actually done some videos and measured some of the players on upslopes and downslopes, and you can honestly see the changes, you know, kinematically to their swings based on those lies. And so if you understand that and you have examples of it, you can create awareness for a player. You can actually show them, hey, we're on this upslope, you don't need to swing so far into out. Go ahead and, you know, trust your normal swing here. This is how you can handle that lie a little bit better.
Okay, here are all the questions. Let's see. Paul Horton, do you generally see less chest turn at impact for players that draw the ball?
It depends on the quality of their mechanics. That's a kind of a broad subject. The higher level players, I still see a lot of rotation. They have better club face alignments and they have better wrist mechanics. If you can kind of picture, well, I'll just kind of put it up there again. You know, if Viktor Hovland is hitting a draw, this particular swing that we're looking at here is a fade, but when he hits a draw, I'm still going to see his pelvis pretty open. I'm still going to see his chest rotated pretty open, but what he's going to do to hit a draw is he's going to instinctually create a little bit more side bend of the chest and of the pelvis. And he's going to generally do that through a little bit more sway of the pelvis in the downswing. So if I looked at him face on and I compared a draw swing to a straight swing, generally the values that I would see change on here would be a little bit more pelvis sway, a little bit more right side bend of the chest and of the pelvis. Now, a high handicapper, they get really square, they stay very closed, and they throw the club head, you know, they throw their hands in the club head at the ball. So yeah, high handicappers, if they're hitting a draw or trying to hit a draw, they're going to be way more square or closed. Good players are going to be pretty close to their natural geometry, and it'll be small adjustments in setup and ball position.
Okay, what is the most chest turn at P4 that you'll see on tour?
Man, that's broad. I mean, so my guys are all built a little different, and they have crazy differences in flexibility. So for example, I'll see Davis Riley, he's hyper mobile in his thoracic spine, and I'll see him turn a 6-iron. He'll have almost 100 degrees of chest rotation at the top sometimes. And honestly, it's too much. And so when he gets there, he feels a little bit out of control. He feels like he doesn't quite hit it as solid. Now he has a lot of speed from there, but when we're hitting a 6, 7, 8, 9 iron, we don't necessarily need more speed. We need more precision. And so that mobility isn't something that we can necessarily get rid of. So we would find other ways to shorten that hand path or shorten that swing so he can manage it. And I would do that by, you know, the easiest thing to do is for him to slightly limit his hip turn. And that's something that's, again, where this tool would come into play. I could film him on a stock swing, show him what his pelvis turn is, and then on the very next swing say, okay, I want you to maintain just, a tiny bit more flexion in your right hip, a tiny bit more flexion in your right ankle and your right knee, and all of a sudden the pelvis turn would shorten and his hand pass length would shorten. And from there, he might be able to hit a 3/4 shot better, or he might be able to be just a little bit more consistent with his ball striking by shortening that swing a little bit.
Is there a tracker that you use most often?
I would say for me, it's the side bend tracker of both the pelvis and the torso. When you look at, what Dr. Phil's presented on in terms of low handle twist velocity players, I've had him measure all of my tour players in 3D with the AMM system long before Sportsbox came out. So I have a relationship with him for a number of years, and some of the the information he's presented has helped shape my thought process around what good mechanics are and how certain matchups work together. For me, when you have side bend in a golf swing, you generally have the trail arm bent more. You generally have the trail wrist more in extension, which generally leads to the shaft leaning a little bit more forward. There's a little more compression, and the swing geometry stays pretty neutral when a golfer has these side bend values. Now, I have had a lot of players that have too much of that as well, and so it works on both sides of the spectrum. But I'd say the one that I am always looking at are the side bend values.
Then when looking at chest bend numbers, where might you see common problems?
It's rare to me when I look at a golfer and I see excessive chest bend. It's important to understand, and I'll just kind of explain a little bit what that is. That's forward bend or extension of the torso there. And I don't see very many golfers that have too much forward bend in transition. Now, I might see a bunch that have too much, if I'm teaching high handicappers, they like to bend way over too much at address. And so that could limit their ability to rotate and turn in the backswing, limit how far their hand path can travel, which in turn limits how far they can hit the golf ball. I like to see golfers, go from the top of the backswing and really flex their pelvis and really bend in the chest, in the torso, and increase that value, because I know that forward bend in this frame of reference right here becomes side bend when we keep moving it down and around closer to impact. And so if you have golfers that have good forward bend values coming out of transition, you're going to typically have golfers that are in good side bend values down and around by the ball.
Sorry, I accidentally muted myself. What are you and Viktor working on at the moment?
That's a good question. We spent a lot of time this past week at the Tour Championship getting him more comfortable with his irons. Viktor got into a little bit of a habit where, and this came from him wanting to get faster and faster and faster with the driver. And Viktor had some counter rotation going on early on at the start of his backswing. And what I mean by that is he's in a neutral position right here. The first thing that he was doing was he was kind of lifting his right heel off the ground and opening his pelvis to create momentum so that he could really speed up his backswing. And that works great for adding speed to your driver. But in his case, he went a little too far with it, and he actually started to do it with his irons throughout the back. So when he started with that counter rotation, which is essentially like opening his body relative to the target, it created a scenario where his hand path was moving too far out on the backswing. There's a little bit too much lift at the top of the backswing with his arms, and then he would respond by throwing in a bunch of quick right side bend down by the ball. And so it started to make his contact a little bit in the heel. When he hit the ball solid, it would shape a little bit too much left to right. That's what we worked on last week, was sort of cleaning that up, getting him in a more neutral setup position, getting him to trigger the start of the backswing by just pushing into the ground off his left foot instead of sort of counter rotating his pelvis and chest to speed up the velocity of the backswing. And the cool thing about it was he didn't lose any speed with his driver. He actually wasn't gaining a whole lot by making the move that he was, that he'd been practicing. But he was hitting the center of the face way more often and had a lot more control over the path direction when we were able to calm that down.
Okay. What do you do when someone has less turn and more hip sway at P6, but hand path moves out?
All right. Say that one more time.
Okay. What do you do when someone has less turn and more hip sway at P6, but the hand path moves out?
Okay. Man, that's a very specific issue there. But so I would go here, I'd get in this face on view. I would, first of all, I would throw up those markers where, let's just look at chest turn and pelvis turn, and let's look at sway of the chest and the pelvis. I probably should have used my slicer example. Geez, that's instead of Viktor Hovland, because I know what this is going to be like.
You have lift instead of sway, or did you mean to?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean. Fat fingers are a problem on an iPhone. I don't need pelvis lift. I need chest sway, pelvis sway.
There you go.
So I'd get in this, obviously I'd film them and I'd get in this, this frame of reference for them. And I think what you're saying is when they start their backswing, they're seeing a huge pelvis sway away from the target, more so than the torso, which is creating a lot of left tilt or left bend of the chest, which is causing their hand path to move more up. I hope I'm describing that correctly. So it's understanding, again, I'm going to go back to the kind of 6 degrees of freedom of the pelvis. And I would start with an explanation of, if I want to increase rotation, I have to decrease sway. To be able to do that, I have to be able to measure it and I have to be able to show it to the player. So I would do something like stick an alignment rod in the ground right outside their right ankle, for a right-handed golfer. And I would have them feeling like they're turning their right hip inside that alignment rod, not allowing it to sway towards that alignment rod. And so just by doing that, when I start increasing the rotational values of the pelvis, you're generally going to increase the rotational values of the chest. And when I increase the rotational values of the chest, I'm going to be making the hand path effectively deeper. And so there's not going to be, if the hand path is deeper, it can't lift as much. So it's going to make that golfer a little bit more shallow and from the inside. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, just one last question. If you're having someone try to hit draw, would you work on hip sway or chest turn to bend ratio? Vice versa for fade.
So it depends on where they're currently at with their hip sway value. If it's pretty much well within the norm of where a good player would be, and that's the cool thing about having these ranges on the app. It'll get you, it'll get you in those, it'll give you some information about where those ranges should be. I would work on matching up the relationship of chest rotation and side bend rotation. And in doing so, you're going to have to look at a couple of other things like club face alignments and so on and so forth. So let's say that a golfer has a really open club face. Well, you're not going to be able to add side bend to that golfer effectively if their club face is open, because they're just going to hit blocks and everything to the right. So I may have to modify the grip. I may have to look at the wrist angles just a little bit to see where the club face alignment is. But in terms of the focus on the body, which is, where I do a lot of my work, I'm definitely going to look at that relationship. And sometimes when you just point it out and say, look, guy, you are way more rotated open than you are side bend. I'm going to hold this club up next to your head, and you're going to hit this next shot, and I'm going to stop your head from moving forward, and we're going to create a little bit more side bend of the chest. So again, it's understanding that when you focus on one of those pieces, you're going to affect the other organically. So if I make the golfer right bend more, I'm going to be slowing down their rotation. If I add more rotation, I'm going to be slowing down their ability to side bend. So I think that is the kind of the gold or the nugget in terms of what I've shared with you guys today. And I think if you understand those matchups and relationships, you can solve any swing geometry issue.
All right, that was great. Thank you so much, Jeff, for your time, and Dr. Phil Cheetham and everyone else. Thanks for spending your Thursday evening with us. And this will be up on YouTube probably sometime tomorrow. And then again, if you're a PGA member and you want MSR credit, please email Ryan or sales@sportsbox.a. I'm putting it in the chat right now with your PGA number. And he'll get that sent in to make sure you get the credit. Otherwise, have a good night, and we'll see you soon. And thank you again, Jeff and Phil and everyone else. Bye. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Bye, everybody.